This is Special Prosecutor Larry KLAYMAN.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth. For competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty. For the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating.
Let's say you just bought a house. Bad news is, you're one step closer to becoming your parents. You'll proudly mow the lawn. Ask if anybody noticed you mowed the lawn. Tell people to stay off the lawn. Compare it to your neighbor's lawn. And complain about having to mow the lawn again. Good news is, it's easy to bundle home and auto through Progressive and save on your car insurance, which, of course, will go right into the lawn. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company, affiliates, and other insurers. Discount not available in all states or situations.
Two stories. Larry KLAYMAN, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry KLAYMAN. We have a really great show, a very timely show. I have two excellent friends and clients on. First, we have Dr. Jerome Corsi, a true American hero, and we're going to get into that. And then Bob Barr, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, former Congressman. Bob and I worked together to impeach Bill Clinton back in the late 1990s. And we want to put everything in perspective, and what really puts it in perspective, and I want the American people to understand what really goes on in Washington, D.C. Dr. Corsi, who's coming on in just a few minutes, my friend Jerry, understands the way it works in Washington. He's been there a very, very long time in terms of his writings, in terms of his activism, and the same thing is true for Bob Barr. What is hard to understand is some of the hype that is coming out of the media these days, and frankly, my former public interest group, which is making all these grandiose predictions that things are going to happen with regard to an investigation by Attorney General Bill Barr, not Bob Barr, but Bill Barr. And we have to put this in the context of what Robert Muller declared this week when he gave his so-called press conference at the Department of Justice, where he said, or implied rather, that he would have indicted the President of the United States for at least obstruction of justice, but Department of Justice regulations prevented him from doing that. That was a very slimy performance. I'm going to write about that in my column in WorldNet Daily this weekend. You can find that at freedomwatchusa.org. But he threw the ball into the hands of Congress, and it is now virtually certain that we're going to have impeachment proceedings. This is what Mueller intended to do, in my opinion, all along. He realized that he couldn't indict the president under department regulations, so he played this game. Well, I'm just handing it over to Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats to do my dirty work. And that's where we find ourselves today. And then we find ourselves with an attorney general who just, in the last few days after Mueller made his statement with an interview on CBS News, while he was in Alaska, he was there doing business when Mueller gave the statement behind his back at the Justice Department. He stated, when asked, that there's no treason here. He can't proceed on treason. Well, do bears live in the woods? Do fat dogs sometimes let off gas? You know, this is what we deal with. We've seen this. Jerry's seen this for 30 years. I've seen this for 30 years, 3 decades of fighting this, maybe even longer. The elites in Washington are not held accountable. So I bring in my brave client and friend, Dr. Jerome Corsi. He is the only one who is fighting back in the courts today against Robert Mueller. We have brought a lawsuit for violation of his constitutional rights. He was threatened with prosecution if he did not lie and implicate the president. That's witness tampering. Ironically, that's the same witness tampering for which Roger Stone was indicted. It's good enough for Stone. It's good enough for Mueller. So Jerry has fought back on that, and he's brought a lawsuit for that obstruction of justice, for releasing grand jury information, for illegal surveillance on him which occurred not just with regard to Jerry Corsi, but the president and hundreds of millions of American citizens. And just this week, we filed legal briefs opposing Mueller's motion to dismiss, and we're confident, particularly since the judge who got the case, Judge Helen Siegel-Uvel, issued an opinion years earlier which validates the causes of action that we brought against Bob Mueller and the Department of Justice and the FBI. So I turn it over to Dr. Corsi, and then I'm also going to discuss our citizens' grand juries, which are getting rolling the week after next, and we're going to be able to present the information which we acquired through the representation of Dr. Corsi, the successful representation, where he was not indicted, and we did that only by pushing back, which is something the president should have done. We're going to seek the indictment of Robert Mueller. And so Jerry's at the forefront of all of this. But the Attorney General, he seems to be doing an investigation maybe to write a book or for posterity. It doesn't seem like he's serious if he says there's no treason. Jerry, I want you to comment on all of this because you are a very astute observer. You've written 22 books, several New York Times bestsellers. You understand the way the dog and pony show in Washington, D.C. works and why you and I had to take action on behalf of the American people.
Well, Larry, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I thought the statement that Robert Mueller gave this week was disgraceful. He said he was going to say nothing new that was not in the report. Well, then why did he need to make a statement? And quite frankly, I don't know why this 400-page report was written, laying out all sorts of leads and other investigative material that ended up with no indictments. There were no indictments for collusion. There were no indictments for obstruction. And if Mueller had concluded that he could not recommend indicting the president or indict the president, why did he even undertake the investigation? He should have said from the beginning, I'm going to be investigating the president on either Russian collusion or obstruction. I can't do it because I can't bring a case. I can't indict the president. That's not the kind of thing you do at a press conference at the last minute. And clearly what Mueller was doing was he was handing it off to Congress, saying to Congress, now you go ahead and go for impeachment. It was a clear signal to Congress to move ahead. I think if Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats do move ahead, it will be political suicide for them. The nation is, I think, much more perceptive than these people in Washington assume. And now with the recent comments of Attorney General Barr, the Washington fix looks like it's in. In other words, just as you saw with Inspector General Horowitz's first report, in which he said that it was really scandalous that then Attorney General Comey cited Hillary Clinton with massive misconduct in using her private telephone system in the Department of State, and yet he said that she didn't intend, which is not part of the statute, to violate the laws, and no one would prosecute her. Well, again, I think Mueller is going to be able to walk, and this entire investigation, Strozek, Page, and the others, some of them may get indicted, but only the lower downs. No one will get charged with treason because Barr will conclude, well, they were all trying to do their job. And that's the Washington fix. And that's why, Larry, we have sued, and I think the American people will listen to our suit. And in the court of public opinion, I think the Washington crowd, left and right, Democrat and Republican, are finally getting exposed.
I agree, Jerry. Tell us what's in your lawsuit. I want our listeners to hear it from you, and why we filed this lawsuit, what the essence of the issues are in front of the court.
Well, first of all, I think, Larry, my 40 hours interrogation, which I sum up in this book, Silent No More, which is doing very well. It's a frightening read in terms of what I went through with these prosecutors who were clearly partisan and were determined to establish that I had a link to Julian Assange, that I'd introduced Roger Stone, and that was the collusion with the Trump campaign to stage when Assange was going to release these Podesta emails. It didn't happen. I have no contact with Julian Assange or WikiLeaks. I don't know any of them. I simply figured out myself in July and August 2016 that Assange had Podesta's emails. The special counsel couldn't believe that. Didn't think I was smart enough or whatever to have concluded it, or just lucky enough to have concluded it. At any rate, what my inquisition brought forward was that, number one, I'm sure I've been under FISA court illegal electronic surveillance, and that's a big charge in our case, that was illegally under electronic surveillance. Secondly, I think the electronic surveillance goes way back to 2004 when I co-authored Unfit for Command, the Swiftboat book with John O'Neill. I think I've been under NSA electronic surveillance since then. And number three, we've charged prosecutorial misconduct for the way I was treated. I mean, here I was threatened with going to prison unless I pled to this one count of lying to the special prosecutor. It was really emails I had forgotten, and I was not going to stand before a judge and God and swear, my hand on a Bible, that I had knowingly and willfully given the special counselor information I knew to be false on a material fact with the intent to deceive them. All those elements have to be proved. I didn't do that. I forgot a few emails. I said I wouldn't. They were threatening they would charge me with obstruction of justice in Washington, D.C. I'd have a judge and jury that would hate me. They would seek a prison term of 25 years. I'd be in prison the rest of my life. It cost us $2 million to defend myself. My wife woke up one morning and Monica said, I'd rather see you the rest of your life in jail than have you not be the man I was married to. And that was what decided me to tell Mueller to take a hike. And I think the fact that they never prosecuted me, the only way I'd have been in prison or a criminal would be if they had scared me enough to plead guilty to a crime I had not committed. I just told them no. And in the final analysis, that stand down to them broke the bank. I think that's what broke Mueller's back. He had no collusion. If I had testified differently, if I'd signed that plea deal, I believe Mueller's final report would have concluded collusion. Because I wouldn't bend, I wouldn't break, despite enormous psychological pressure, I think Mueller failed.
And you stood up to everybody. You see, that's the difference here, and that's what I've been saying all along with regard to the president and his lawyers, is that the president could have done the same thing you did. He could have sued for illegal surveillance. He could have pushed back. By allowing Mueller to continue on, we see the fruits of that this week, with Mueller now bucking it over to Congress for impeachment. The president should have taken Mueller out a long time ago. Do it legally. You don't have to do it through tweets. You don't have to do it through telling people to fire him. The president could have done what you did, but he hesitated, and he was not getting good advice. But we pushed back. We won. We fought the law, in quotes. Of course, they're not the law. They're the outlaws. And we won. Now we're pushing back. And what we're doing is real. It's in court. It's not some promise that I'm gathering documents and I'm going to figure things out. You know, Gary, you have information that the Attorney General hasn't even opened a grand jury with this guy Durham up there in Connecticut. Am I correct? I mean, all he's doing is getting documents and reading.
Well, Durham, it appears, is going to be just like this John Huber that was appointed when, we had our former Attorney General who was, a complete failure to do anything at all, and neither Huber nor Durham are going to do anything. They're not going to have grand juries. They're not going to bring indictments. See, what people have to understand is that Mueller was part of the cover-up. This was a deep state coup d'etat. The American people realize that. But Mueller was designed in order to produce evidence of collusion or obstruction so as to make the president guilty. The president did nothing. He was the victim here of a group that was determined to keep him from being president. And what we're doing is fighting back, because Barr could easily become now part of the cover-up with his job to maybe bring a few low-level indictments or to use the Inspector General Horowitz's next report as an excuse where he doesn't indict anyone. They're very
well,
good.
And not only that, Jared, we've got about 30 seconds left in the segment. We'll pick this up on the second segment, is that, we have Lindsey Graham up there in the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's punted on his investigation. Where's that? And I think the reason is that he's the one who told Senator John McCain to give the Steele dossier to the FBI. I mean, They're all conflicted up there. So what you're doing is super important. We'll be right back with Jerry Corsi after this short break.
Fearless.
He's claiming he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
He don't care, he uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special Prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry KLAYMAN.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
We're back with Dr. Jerome Corsi. I want you to explain, and this is in your book, Jerry, and I urge people to buy that book because it's super important, how you were treated during those interviews. And one of the things that you were berated on, you were called a liar. Of course, if anybody's a liar, it's Muller and his staff. And that's what we're, in fact, proving in court as we speak. But they berated you on the book that you wrote about Obama's birth certificate. And when we go on TV, we went on together recently with Anderson Cooper of CNN. He tried to undercut your credibility with the so-called birther issue. Now, we're going to be bringing a lawsuit on this. People have called you a liar. They have called you a fraud in presenting that information. They've called me the same thing as a birther, and I wear these badges on my sleeve, and a badge of honor. But tell us why that birth certificate was fraudulent and why these people have no basis to defame you over the birth certificate. They have none. And we're going to be pushing back on that ground, too, because this issue's not over. This issue's just beginning.
Well, Larry, the current book is Silent No More, and it describes my 40 hours of really abusive treatment. I mean, they ridiculed my belief in God. The prosecutors of Mueller's team ridiculed my book, said they were all lies. The truth is, on the birth certificate, and I've said I was in Hawaii with the only law enforcement investigation of the birth certificate, which was Sheriff Arpaio, Mike Zulu, and the cold case posse. And I witnessed the Hawaii Department of Health refusing to turn over to law enforcement the original 1961 birth records that supposedly they hold for Barack Obama. Now, I've said from the beginning that what was produced by the White House in 2011 was a computer printout of a long-form birth certificate that did not exist in 1961 when Obama was born. And in fact, I found in Hawaii the birth certificate, the long form, from which the one produced by the White House was copied, was forged. It's a forged document that the White House produced. Obama's never produced any original 1961 birth certificate records. I said, if they exist, show them to the public, and that'll settle the issue. I can't imagine why Hawaii is keeping these things a state secret unless they don't exist. Or the way they exist is not how they were represented. Hawaii did allow people who were not born in Hawaii to be registered as Hawaii births. It's one of the quirks of the Hawaii birth certificate system. And Larry, I want to press this issue because I've continued to be maligned on birther, et cetera, when I think, in fact, I've always been right. And it's another part of exposing the corruption in the White House and in Washington.
Well, and you never said where Obama was born. You were focusing on the birth certificate, which is fraudulent. And, I've said this. You do a Photoshop of this, you can see things were inserted in there. Mike Zullo and Sheriff Arpaio did a very thorough investigation. And, just on the face of it, for anybody who doesn't want to get into it much further, President Obama is listed as African American. The term was not used in Hawaii then. It was Negro or black. Okay, so where did that come from? The person who doctored it, couldn't go back in time. So, you see, this is what goes on is that, and we all go through this, and whether it was Robert Mueller's team with Aaron Zelinsky and others, and Jeannie Rhee wearing her see-through blouse, I can't pronounce it, I'm laughing, or others trying to upset you or divert your attention during those interrogations, or whether it's Anderson Cooper on CNN and others trying to undercut your credibility, the fact is you're right about that. And we're going to prove that in court by bringing defamation lawsuits against those who have called you and people like me liars. So that's where we're going.
Larry, I'm very thankful that you're representing me and that we're going to fight this, because it's the only thing. If you go back to the founding of the United States, it was founded by people who just refused to go along with the tyranny of Great Britain. They just said no. And if you look at the courage they had and the determination, what I know in my own mind and my own life is that I am not going to tolerate a lie. And I'm not going to allow the United States to be turned into a socialist or communist dictatorship, totalitarianism, without fighting it. The Mueller team made an attempt to ruin me, to eliminate all my consulting contracts, to eliminate all my employment. Cost me a huge amount of money to defend myself.
Jerry, I thank you for what you've done, because that's why we're good friends as well as colleagues. Safe travels. Thanks, my good friend.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry KLAYMAN.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
I'm privileged to have my friend and my colleague Bob Barr, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, former Congressman. Bob and I worked together during the Clinton years to impeach Bill Clinton. We're going to talk about that and the ramifications today, because it's a virtual certainty that we're going into impeachment with regard to President Donald Trump. And, of course, the catalyst to that, the final straw that broke the back of anyone who was opposing that on the Democrat side, were comments, in my view, of Special Counsel Robert Mueller just this week, where he said he would have indicted the president if there hadn't been, where he implied that he would have indicted the president, but there were Department of Justice regulations preventing it. That's total nonsense. There's nothing in the Constitution that prevents a special counsel or anyone from indicting the president. It just doesn't exist. But he calculated this to get Congress to impeach, because his goal is to defeat the president in 2020. And contrary to the conventional wisdom, which I disagree with, and Bob, you can talk to this after you give us your comments as a former prosecutor on what Mueller did this week and what he did with regard to his report and his entire witch hunt. But I believe that the impeachment that Bob and I started, Bob obviously introduced the articles of impeachment. I worked with him. Others did as well. I believe that weakened the Clinton-Gore presidency to the point that Al Gore was defeated in 2000. I mean, Al Gore, whatever you say about him, okay, I mean, he's got a lot of problems. He has no morals. He has no ethics. He has nothing. But basically, he lost to a complete idiot, in my view, George W. Bush. And it was only that impeachment, which I think weakened Gore enough, that he narrowly lost. That's my view. Bob may disagree with me or not on that. But let's start, Bob, with the whole issue of what Mueller said this week, how he behaved as a prosecutor. You were a U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, High Justice Department prosecutor. Give us your thoughts about that and analyze it for our listenership.
Thank you, Larry, and I'm glad that whenever we have the opportunity to talk and with your many listeners, that you remind them of the work that we did, the opportunity that you and I had to work together 20 years ago during the lead up to and the Clinton impeachment and even thereafter. It's very, very important to remind people of not just that episode, but also your involvement in it in behalf of the American people. With regard to Bob Mueller, what Bob Mueller did in holding a news conference, making a statement, and then walking away was inappropriate from every professional prosecutorial angle. And the lack of professionalism that he showed goes back to the fact that he stated in his news well, it wasn't a news conference, it was just his news statement. He said, look, from the very beginning, I knew that we could not indict a sitting president. It wasn't as if the Department of Justice all of a sudden decided this. It was a long-standing, pre-existing policy. Yet, notwithstanding that, he proceeded to spend months after months after months, millions of dollars of taxpayer money, trying to do exactly what he said policy at the Department of Justice didn't allow him to do. He simply could not leave it alone. And this betrays his true agenda, which was to go after Trump. So from the get-go, what Mueller was doing was highly inappropriate. And not only inappropriate and unprofessional, he went beyond the scope of his mandate. He went beyond the scope of normal prosecutorial bounds. He then holds a news event to give us his personal view on something, which is highly inappropriate and improper and unethical. But he then just sort of walks away from it, did not even have the courage to answer questions. And this is an important difference, Larry, as you will recall from how Ken Starr, who was an independent counsel as opposed to simply a special counsel, which Robert Mueller is, as an independent counsel, Ken Starr had a legal obligation to inform the House of Representatives of any substantial evidence of impeachable offenses that he, Ken Starr, uncovered during the course of his lawful investigation of Bill Clinton. Ken Starr did that. He sent to the House of Representatives in the fall of 1998 an exhaustive report. Not only that, though, Ken Starr then had the backbone to do what Bob Mueller does not, and that is Ken Starr went before the House Judiciary Committee, testified, and left himself open for hour upon hour upon hour of question and attacks by the Democrats. So Ken Starr, one, he had a legal obligation to send a report to the House. Bob Mueller did not. Ken Starr had the backbone and the courage and the stamina to stand for the attacks by the Democrats, to answer questions for them and for the American people. Bob Mueller didn't. He goes before the press, says what he wants to say, which is that I didn't have the authority to do this. Gee, I wish I had the authority to do it, but since I don't, I'm going to do it anyway, and hopefully you in the House will now move forward and go after Trump, which is basically what he said. It was not only unprofessional, but it lacked the courage that Ken Starr, for example, displayed in how he handled matters like this 20 years ago.
Of course, Ken Starr, I believe, had the ability to indict Clinton. He didn't, Bob, in that respect. And there's nothing in the Constitution that prevents it. And every country in the world, nearly, in the Western world, holds their prime ministers or their presidents accountable. But in this case, it isn't warranted with regard to this president. There was no underlying crime, so how could he obstruct justice for something that didn't exist? But I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about Dr. Corsi, because he was on earlier. Now, Dr. Corsi has testified, and he's been on radio and TV frequently, including my show and every other show, saying that Robert Mueller and his staff threatened him with an indictment unless he would lie about his contacts with Roger Stone and WikiLeaks to try to implicate the president in Russian collusion. And if he would, in fact, lie, that they would offer him a sweetheart plea agreement. I don't think it says sweetheart. Plead guilty to one count of perjury with no jail time. Dr. Corsi refused. He said, I'm not going to lie in front of my creator. I'm not going to lie generally. I'm not going to have this on my record as a perjurer who can't vote anymore in most states. And that's not the way I'm going to live my life. And he held his ground. He stood his ground. And we won because we made it difficult for Mueller to proceed. We also sued Mueller. That's in court right now. So I want to get your thoughts because, you know, it's ironic that Roger Stone is indicted for witness tampering, which, you know, by his own words, he did. I mean, he threatened the life of Randy Credico and his dog to testify in a particular way. But in terms of Muller appears to have done the same thing, engaged in attempted witness tampering, obstruction of justice, a violation of First Amendment rights of Jerry Corsi to testify truthfully, violation of Fourth Amendment rights because we have evidence that Dr. Corsi was surveilled. So I want to get your thoughts on what Corsi's doing and pushing back, and of course I'm representing him on that. But, as a prosecutor, as a lawyer, what are your thoughts about the actionability of those claims once they bear out in court?
As you know, Larry, prosecutors in our system, whether they are state prosecutors or federal prosecutors, U.S. attorneys, Department of Justice attorneys, assistant United States attorneys, they have very broad power and are largely, not entirely, but largely immune from being sued or held civilly or criminally liable for pursuing investigations. But they have to do so within the bounds of the law. And it is highly improper for a prosecutor, particularly a federal prosecutor, to threaten witnesses as you've described. And this is one reason why it's so important to hopefully see Attorney General Barr, Bill Barr, move forward with investigating these matters relating to hopefully not just the genesis of the so-called Russia collusion probe and the what are obviously violations of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act statute involving surveilling American citizens based on powers under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. But hopefully we will find out answers to more than that in terms of how the special counsel's office actually operated and whether, in fact, they did abuse their powers. Now, you and I both know that more often than not, investigations launched by the federal government of the federal government oftentimes never see the light of day. And that's why it's important that, notwithstanding efforts by the federal government to get to the bottom of issues like this, it's very important for private individuals through lawyers such as yourself and through organizations like Freedom Watch and others use the lawful process, the legal process through our civil system to get answers to these problems and hold government accountable, because more often than not, as I say, government does not hold itself accountable. That's why it's important for you and others to take up that mantle and run with it.
You're right, Bob. But you and I, first of all, backing up a little bit, because I didn't make it completely clear, is that Jerry Corsi's lawsuit is primarily based under a case called Bivens. You know that, the Bivens case.
Right.
Is that violations of constitutional rights occurred. Fortunately, we drew a judge, interestingly enough, a Clinton appointee, Judge Helen Siegel-Uvel, who issued a ruling with regard to Voice of America years earlier, allowing a case to proceed with facts very similar to what happened to Dr. Corsi with Muller. So she's kind of pinned in here in terms of her own rulings in the past. And I'm confident it will proceed. But I'm perhaps a little less confident than you are that Bill Barr will go the distance here. Because when in our lifetime, Bob, have we seen any of the elites held accountable? And just yesterday in an interview that Barr gave with CBS, when he was asked, do you think that Rosenstein, that Comey, that the Lovebirds, the rest committed treason? He contradicted the president. And he said, no, I don't think they committed treason in a legal sense. And that tells me that what we're basically having here is an investigation, but an investigation which is more to write a report for history than to bring about prosecutions at the highest level. I just don't see it. I have never seen it in my lifetime. And that's why what we're doing at Freedom Watch, what you do at Liberty Guard, and actually trying to bring about justice, not just getting documents. Okay, I mean, documents are fine. Put them in a frame and hang them on the wall. Is that we need justice in the courts. We need justice at citizens' grand juries. We, the American people, need to take it into our own hands because it hasn't happened. And I do believe the past is a prologue, and I'm thankful to Bill Barr. I, of course, wish you had been Attorney General. We'd have more of a chance of justice here. I'm thankful that he shut down the Muller investigation, but he shut that down. It's a shell game, and it's now going over to Congress, and he can't control that. So unless you take these people out legally, the president's going to wind up getting impeached, and by the time we're done, God knows what's going to happen to this country. Already today, the stock market is crashing. The Democrats, by that impeachment, are taking the economy down, and the country's in dire straits. So, I want to thank you for your efforts, Bob. Bob and I have always been colleagues and friends, and we look for ways to bring about justice, and we're not done yet. So, Bob, I welcome you back to Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. You are a special prosecutor in your own right. Thank you for everything you've done. And we'll be back with the verdict section of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
Now, fellow patriots, ladies and gentlemen, supporters of Freedom Watch, supporters of this show, which, by the way, I want you to disseminate this show each week to your friends, circulate it. They need to hear it because what we're telling here is the truth. We don't sugarcoat. I'm not promising things that aren't going to happen. I'm telling the American people that we need to do it for ourselves. And I know I've talked about this before because, recently I watched the movie Wyatt Earp. I urge you to go watch it. You can find it on Amazon Prime, probably other networks. But in there, Wyatt Earp's father, who was a lawyer, and his grandfather was a judge, Wyatt Earp's father says to him, played by Gene Hackman, and of course Wyatt Earp was played by Kevin Costner, he says, the most important thing in life is your family. Keep them close. The rest are strangers. And you, Wyatt, will encounter a lot of very vicious people. This is the Old West, and we live in a world today which is even more ruthless than the Old West. He says, you'll encounter these people. Make sure that when you do, you hit first and you shoot to kill. Now, we're not advocating killing anybody, okay? We're advocating peaceful and legal means. But the moral to the story here is that we have to take out these criminals. We have to take out Muller. We have to take out Comey. We have to take out Rosenstein, who wanted to wire himself to entrap the president and get him thrown out under the 25th Amendment. We have to take on the Rosensteins, as I said. We have to take on the Lovebirds, the Bruce Orrs, the John Brennans, the James Clappers, the Obamas, the Clintons. We have to do that ourselves because what we've seen in Washington, and the past is a prologue, is simply a dog and pony show. Because in the end, the Democrats and the Republicans, the National Football League of Corruption, the American League, the National League, they just go along. They get themselves on Fox News. They get themselves on CNN. They get themselves on MSNBC. They rake in the money for re-election. They rake in the money, pocketing it themselves. Money flows in Washington. Don't kid yourself. Bribery does happen. And they know that if they upset this apple cart, they'll lose their power. They'll lose their fortunes. These people come into office with little, they go out with lot. And that's why we, the people, need to rise up just like we did in 1776. And people like Jerry Corsi, who you heard earlier on the show, and my client and friend, Bob Barr, who instituted impeachment. I brought cases for Bob Barr as well at Judicial Watch to try to, prevent the Panama Canal from being given to the Communist Chinese, which it was, through a lease. See, these people are the people we need to gravitate to. We don't need more documents. We don't need Tom Fitton, to pound his chest and say, okay, I've got documents. Now you, government, do it for us. Okay, he can't do it because he's a lawyer. You see, and the young lawyers that he has around him don't know how to litigate to any great extent in court. We need the Jerry Corsis. We need the Larry Claymans. We need the Freedom Watches. We need to be able to bring hard-hitting cases. Citizens' grand juries, which we're starting the week after next. We will indict Mueller. We will try him. We will convict him. We will sentence him. And we'll seek to mete out those sentences peacefully and legally. And not just Mueller, all of the criminals. And that's why we need your strong support. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. Donate with tax-deductible contributions. We need to get bigger. I'm thin right now. I'm pulled in many different directions, but I have to focus on what needs to be done here because no one else will do it. And we're also educating the American people that we hold our fate in our own hands, that we need to rise up, that we can't depend on our so-called government to do the job that our founding fathers did in 1776. I can't say that enough. I'm so sick of watching Sean Hannity with the same monologue every single time sell this stuff to boost his ratings and advertising dollars. I'm sick of listening to Judge Napolitano and Fox News trash the president. I'm sick of a lot of different things, and that's what gets me going, and I hope that you're sick of it too. So support Freedom Watch, support what we're doing, join our Justice League, roll up your sleeves, become part of this new American revolution. Because if we sit around waiting for other people to do it for us, our country is going to slip away. And that's the message I give you every week, but I can't give it enough. Because unless we rise up now, in 15 years, there will be no country, maybe even less. So tune in next week to another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Go to freedomwatchusa.org. Sign up to our Justice League. Until then, God bless you. God bless your family. God bless America. And God save America. Thank you.